Once, stillness was a presence. Now, it's treated like a failure. We've forgotten that the quietest moments were once the most alive, that a single breath, taken without urgency, was once enough to touch the world. Now we chase noise, tasks, deadlines, nexts. We've convinced ourselves that movement is meaning. That value comes from velocity, that if something isn't growing, earning, producing, it must be falling behind. We live in a kind of permanent, leaning forward, checking, refreshing, replying. Even when our bodies stop, our minds twitch in place. Try to sit for 1 minute, just one, without doing anything. Not planning, not processing, not optimizing, just sitting. You'll feel it, the tremble, the subtle ache to move, to justify, to fill. Where once there was reverence for the pause, now there is panic. We treat stillness like a void, but it isn't. Stillness is space, and space is what gives form its meaning. Without silence, music is noise. Without darkness, light is blinding. Without rest, work becomes hollow. The ancients knew this. They built temples not just for worship but for stillness. They carved spaces to listen not to sermons, but to the silence inside the stone. Now, even our places of rest are restless. Screens in waiting rooms, music in elevators, notifications at the dinner table. Silence has been paved over, and in its place, we've built a world that's always on. And when the world is always on, there's no room for being, only doing. We scroll to avoid the space between thoughts. We multitask through grief. We check messages during joy. And slowly, we forget how to dwell in anything. We become visitors in our own moments. Doing nothing, once a sacred act, has become a sin. Worse, an impossibility. We've lost the texture of time, the long inhale, the moment between moments, the soft edge where now begins. We fear that if we stop, everything will collapse. But what if that collapse is exactly what we need? Because underneath the noise is something we've forgotten how to meet ourselves. Not the performing self, not the productive self, not the persona, but the one that waits just beneath the motion. Still, quiet, present. It doesn't need to prove. It doesn't need to say anything clever. It just is. And in a world obsessed with becoming, simply being is the most radical thing you can do. Stillness hasn't disappeared. We just stopped turning toward it. But it's there, in every breath we abandon, in every pause we rush through, in every second we try to skip. It waits, not to be understood, just to be noticed. The moment we hear the phrase, doing nothing, a quiet shame rises. As if we failed, wasted time, stepped out of line. We live in a culture where worth is tied to motion, where value is measured by output, where rest is a delay, a luxury, a weakness. So when we stop doing, we fear we stop being. But that's the illusion. Doing is an expression. Being is the source. A tree doesn't grow because it is constantly doing something. It grows because it is, because the sun warms it, because its roots drink, because it listens to gravity without rushing. There is wisdom in stillness that can't be accessed by activity, only by presence. But somewhere along the way, we blurred the line between silence and absence, between softness and weakness, between not acting and not existing. So we filled the silence with noise, with content, with performance. We did more, faster, louder, hoping it would make us more real. But doing more doesn't make us more alive. Sometimes it makes us less. Because when you never stop, you never hear the quiet voice inside asking if you're still connected to what matters. And when you ignore that voice long enough, you start to forget it was ever yours. You become a machine that only knows forward, that only knows function. But you are not a machine. You are not a sum of what you've accomplished. You are not a brand, a backlog, a building project. You are a being. And beings were not made to prove. They were made to dwell, to witness, to breathe into the moments that have no name. Doing nothing is not being nothing. It's being with nothing without fear. It's sitting in the empty space and letting it not fill, letting it exist. That takes more courage than we admit. Because doing is a way to protect ourselves from what we might feel if we stopped. What happens when the checklist is done? What do you meet when the screens go dark? There, in the stillness, you meet what you've been avoiding. Your doubt, your longing, your loneliness, your forgotten joy, your deep animal breath, your fragile hope. You. And that's the most important meeting of your life. But you can't schedule it. You can't plan it. You can only arrive. And arrival requires stopping. Not forever, just long enough to remember you're not a task. You're a soul. And it doesn't need to do. It only needs to be. Not being nothing, being here, fully. And in that presence, life begins to return. Not with noise, but with depth. There was a time when numbness came from trauma, from deep shock, from pain too big to carry. Now it comes from calendars, from pings and scrolls, from back-to-back commitments, from a life that never allows us to stop long enough to feel what's real. Busyness used to be a condition. Now it's an identity. It's how we introduce ourselves. It's how we justify our existence. It's how we avoid silence without having to call it fear. We wear exhaustion like a badge, a symbol that we matter, that we're contributing, that we're important. But under the surface of all that doing, most of us are simply avoiding the ache, avoiding the question, avoiding the quiet voice that asks us softly if this is really living. Because when we stay constantly busy, we don't have to feel. We don't have to grieve the dream that didn't happen. We don't have to face the relationship we outgrew. We don't have to reckon with the gap between who we are and who we said we'd become. We don't have to meet ourselves. Instead, we stay moving, productive, purposeful. But beneath it all, we are starving for depth, for slowness, for meaning. The strange thing is, busyness doesn't protect us from pain, it protects us from awakening. Because to awaken is to feel, and to feel is to let the truth arrive. And the truth rarely arrives on schedule. The truth comes in pauses, in breakdowns, in lost afternoons where nothing makes sense and there's nowhere to hide. Truth doesn't shout, it whispers. And you can't hear whispers when you're always running. So we keep moving, even when we don't know why, even when it hurts. And in that motion, we mistake numbness for peace. We think, I must be okay. I'm getting things done. But deep down we know we've traded aliveness for efficiency. And the cost is higher than we thought. Because one day, when the noise finally fades, when the phone battery dies, when the deadlines are behind us, we will look around and realize we don't know how to sit with the one person we've been avoiding all along. Ourselves. Not the curated self, not the performing self, the real one. And in that meeting, if we're lucky, we will remember that doing is not the point. Being is. And being begins where busyness ends. We think our lives are built by what we do. We track progress in completed tasks, count meaning in milestones, build identities out of occupations, accomplishments, output. But what if the truest part of your life isn't found in what you do, but in the spaces between? The moment after you close the laptop, the breath before you answer the question, the silence between one thought and the next. We don't linger there. We don't even notice it. We've been trained to see pauses as gaps, wasted time, dead air, voids to be filled. But the truth is, you begin in the space between. Because in that space there is no doing, only being. And in being, you meet yourself, not the one you perform, not the one you prove, the one who simply exists beneath all the motion. That's where clarity lives, not in the rush of decision, but in the pause that came just before. That's where wisdom speaks, not in words, but in the space that cradles them. The greatest things in your life will not come from your plans. They will emerge from your stillness. From that evening walk, when you weren't trying to solve anything. From that morning you stared out the window and didn't check your phone. From that moment, you exhaled and let yourself feel without fixing. In that space, you stopped doing, and something sacred began. Something like remembering, something like returning. The body longs for these spaces. The soul thrives there, but the mind fears it. Because the mind wants motion. It wants stories, narratives, goals. It wants to be busy, so it doesn't have to be present. Because presence is vulnerable. In presence, there is no mask, no plan, just this moment unfiltered. But that's the only place anything real can happen. So much of our anxiety, our fatigue, our restless dissatisfaction doesn't come from doing too little. It comes from never allowing space. We move from one task to the next without integration, without meaning, without breath, and the soul suffocates. The good news is, you don't have to escape. You don't need to go on retreat. You don't need to move to the mountains. You just need to notice. To find the spaces already waiting for you in the hallway, in the shower, in the single sip of tea that you don't rush through. You begin in the pause, and the pause is always there. We've been taught to fear stillness, to associate it with idleness, with apathy, with waste. To be still is to fall behind, we're told, to lose momentum, to miss our chance. But that's not stillness, that's stagnation, and they are not the same. Stagnation is collapse. Stillness is attention. Stillness is not laziness, it's listening. The tree is still, but it listens to the light, to the temperature, to the rhythm of the season. The animal in the wild becomes still not because it is passive, but because it is aware, fully alive, every sense attuned. Stillness is not absence, it is reception. It is the willingness to feel without moving away, to wait without forcing the answer, to listen to the world, to others, to yourself without interruption. But we're not used to this. We think listening is waiting to speak. We think rest is something earned. We think if we're not acting, we're not useful. If we're not producing, we're not valuable. And so we move even when it's meaningless, even when it's making us sick, even when it's keeping us numb. But stillness asks us to return to the moment we forgot, the one where doing nothing meant you were finally ready to receive everything. The subtle truth, the quiet wisdom, the inner pulse that only makes itself known when the noise subsides. Because insight doesn't always arrive through thought. Sometimes it arrives through waiting. Real presence, the kind that makes someone feel truly seen, the kind that allows truth to speak, that only arises from stillness. Not speech, not action, just being there, unmoved, with open attention. To be still is not to give up. It is to make room, and when you make room, something enters that was waiting all along. Stillness is how we relearn to hear the world breathing around us, to feel our own breath as sacred, not as background noise. Stillness is how we return to the kind of knowing that isn't found in data, but in depth. Not in reaction, but in relationship. And when we forget how to be still, we forget how to truly relate to ourselves, to others, to the moment. Stillness is not laziness. It is listening. And listening is the most radical form of love we still have left. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that we must earn our existence, that simply being is not enough, that value is not innate, it must be demonstrated, proven, documented, quantified. We learn to see ourselves as projects, to-do lists with limbs, living resumes. And so we build and climb and measure and chase, not because we want to, but because we've been told we must. If we rest too long, we fear becoming invisible. If we pause, we worry we'll fall behind. If we say, "I did nothing today," we feel shame curl up behind our ribs. Because somewhere inside, we've begun to believe that unless we are producing, we are failing. But you were not born to perform. You were not designed to prove your worth. You do not owe the world your efficiency. You are not what you produce. You are a presence, a consciousness, a soul that arrived long before you had a schedule. And none of that disappears when you stop doing. In fact, it's only in the stopping that you remember who you are beneath it all. When the job title falls away, when the inbox is silent, when the applause fades, when the algorithm forgets you, what's left? That is the truth of you. And it has nothing to do with output. It is the quiet fire that doesn't burn to be seen. It is the stillness beneath the need to impress. It is the breath that comes when you no longer rush. It is you without the armor. You when there's no one to impress. You unperformed. And yes, you can still build, create, offer beauty to the world, but not as payment for your right to exist, not as proof of your relevance. Rather, as an overflow of the life you've remembered inside stillness. Because creation is sacred, but only when it comes from being, not from fear. Only when it flows through you, not when it's forced from you. So ask yourself gently, what if I didn't need to earn rest? What if I didn't have to justify being here? What if I could simply be? And what if that was already enough? Because you are not your inbox. You are not your calendar. You are not your follower count, your output, your momentum. You are not a machine. You are a mystery, a moment, a mirror. And the art of doing nothing is how you return to that truth. Not by achieving, but by arriving. We think of time as something that moves, a river, a clock, a constant ticking in the background, always forward, always slipping away. But what if time doesn't move? What if we do? What if the rush we feel, the panic of not doing enough, the ache of being behind, is not a symptom of time, but of our relationship to it? Because when you stop chasing time, it stops running. And you begin to feel something strange, something ancient. Time doesn't pass. It opens. It expands. It deepens. It stops being a track you run along and becomes a space you sink into. But to feel that, you have to stop. Stop measuring. Stop hurrying. Stop squeezing life into a container designed to make you feel inadequate no matter how much you do. Because productivity wants to compress time, to fold it, shrink it, optimize it, make every second work for you. But presence wants to expand it, to give it back its breath, to feel a single moment stretch wide enough to hold an entire world. When you stop chasing, you start receiving. You notice the pause between the inhale and the exhale, the warmth of sunlight on a wall, the pattern of your own heartbeat when there's nothing demanding your attention. These aren't small things, they're everything. The most meaningful moments in your life, you didn't plan them. You didn't rush through them. They arrived in stillness, in slowness, in the in-between. But our culture doesn't teach us to linger. It teaches us to move, to schedule, to maximize. And so we fill every hour with tasks, alerts, noise, and wonder why we feel hollow at the end of the day. We've forgotten how to feel time from the inside, to let it breathe through us rather than push against us. Try this. Sit still. Turn off the clock. Let the silence stretch a little too long. Notice the discomfort, then notice what lives beneath it. The mind will twitch. The body will fidget. You'll reach for something, anything, to fill the space. But if you wait, you'll feel it. Time beginning to shift. The seconds lose their edge. The urgency fades, and a different kind of time emerges. A time that isn't keeping score. A time that isn't running out. A time that doesn't belong to the calendar. It belongs to you, because it is you. The breath, the being, the rhythm that was never meant to be rushed. When you stop chasing time, you start remembering what it actually is. Not a threat, not a countdown, but a container for presence. And presence doesn't pass, it unfolds. The mind forgets, but the body remembers. Long before the schedules, the screens, the algorithms of urgency, your body knew how to be still. Not frozen, not stiff, but open. Still like a mountain, not because it is resisting motion, but because it is anchored in presence. And this stillness lives in you, even now, even in the middle of your rush. The problem is not that we've lost the ability to rest. It's that we've trained ourselves to ignore the signals that say, slow down, breathe, enough. You were not born to hustle. You were not born into tension. You didn't arrive with an internal to-do list. You arrived with lungs, with skin, with rhythm. You arrived whole, unscored by productivity, unjudged by performance. The baby doesn't justify its value. It simply breathes, cries, feels. And that presence, that unapologetic being, lives in you still. It shows up when you sit without agenda, when you walk without destination, when you let your shoulders drop and your breath return to the place it began. The body doesn't ask for proof. It asks for presence. And it remembers how to receive it when you stop telling it to be useful. But we forget. We rush, we clench, we force the body into chairs and routines and versions of stillness that feel more like imprisonment than peace. We call rest laziness. We call tiredness weakness. We call slowing down a luxury rather than a return. But when we allow it, the body returns us anyway. Through illness, through breathlessness, through exhaustion that cannot be pushed past. It whispers, then it speaks, then it refuses to continue until we remember how to be still. And in that stillness, we begin to feel what's been missing. Not just peace, but sensation, warmth, texture, life, not as abstraction, but as touch. The soft fabric on your skin, the pulse in your hands, the ache in your legs, that is not a problem to solve, but a message to receive. The body doesn't need to be taught how to rest. It needs to be allowed. Because stillness isn't new. It's the first language you ever spoke. And when you let the body remember, the mind begins to follow. And then something shifts. You realize stillness isn't just something you do, it's something you are. You are not the tension. You are not the rush. You are not the noise. You are the space beneath it. And the body has known this all along. In a world that runs on urgency, to pause is a rebellion. In a culture that measures your worth by output, to do nothing is a radical act. It doesn't seem like much to sit quietly, to stare out the window, to resist the pull to scroll, reply, react. But in truth, it's one of the last forms of personal freedom we still possess. Because everything around you is designed to keep you moving, faster, buzzier, hungrier. The machine does not want you still. Stillness makes you hard to sell to, hard to control, hard to distract. Stillness makes you aware. And awareness is dangerous in systems that depend on unconscious compliance. You're told that if you're not improving, you're decaying. That rest is earned, that silence is empty, that boredom is failure. And so we stay in motion not because it's meaningful, but because it's expected. But when you choose to do nothing, truly nothing, you begin to see through it all. You see how much of your urgency was manufactured, how many of your goals were inherited, how many of your fears were planted, not discovered. And in that clarity, you reclaim something. Not just time, but sovereignty. You take back your breath. You take back your rhythm. You take back your right to exist without performing. And that is deeply unsettling to a world that depends on your restlessness. To do nothing is not to be passive. It's to refuse. To refuse the idea that your value comes from motion. To refuse the story that your worth is earned. To refuse the script that says your attention must always be elsewhere. Doing nothing is how you remember what your attention feels like when it belongs to you again. It's how you remember what you think when no one is telling you what to believe. It's how you return to the sound of your own voice beneath the performance. This kind of stillness is not indulgent. It's not laziness. It's resistance. Gentle, quiet, patient, but real. And you don't need to explain it. You don't need to defend it. You just need to give yourself permission to sit, to breathe, to do nothing. And let that be not an escape, but a statement. I am already enough. Even when I'm not producing, even when I'm not chasing, even when I'm simply here. And in that here-ness, everything that matters starts to rise. There is a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels like room. A soft, slow widening. A space where you can finally breathe all the way in. Not because anything changed around you, but because something shifted within you. Something unclenched. And for the first time in what feels like years, you feel yourself arrive. This is what spaciousness feels like. Not productivity, not efficiency, not free time, wedged between obligations. Spaciousness is different. It isn't scheduled. It isn't earned. It simply appears when you stop stuffing every crack of your day with noise. When you stop filling every pause with content, conversation, clicks. When you allow silence, not as a pause between tasks, but as the task itself. Because silence is not absence, it's presence without pressure. And when it returns, everything inside you begins to stretch again. Your breath deepens, your thoughts slow, your senses sharpen. Suddenly, you're not scanning for the next thing. You're seeing what's right here. The shadow moving across the floor, the soft hum in the room, the weight of your own body fully present, fully real. Spaciousness is not about having more time. It's about being less entangled with proving, with chasing, with compressing your life into performance. It's about becoming available to the moment without needing it to validate you. And it doesn't require a retreat. It doesn't need a vacation or a mountaintop. It's available in a slow cup of tea, in a quiet walk with no destination, in the choice to leave a moment unfilled. That is the art, not rushing to fill the gaps, but letting the gaps be what they are. We've been taught to fear the gap, to call it boredom, idleness, wasted time. But what if the gap is where you return to yourself? What if the most sacred parts of you don't live in the noise, but in the hush beneath it? Spaciousness doesn't demand anything from you. It invites you to stretch, to soften, to remember that you are not defined by how much you carry. You are defined, if at all, by the way you hold what you carry and by your ability to set it down. This is not surrender, it is realignment. A return to the inner wideness that was never gone, only crowded. And in that return, you rediscover something priceless. You were never meant to be compressed. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness requires space. We are so used to becoming that we've forgotten how to be. Be without striving. Be without shaping. Be without trying to earn presence through performance. But presence doesn't need to be earned. It only needs to be remembered. And remembering is a quiet thing, a slow thing, a practice. Not a goal, not a race, a return. The practice of simply being is not glamorous. It will not get you praise. It won't go viral. It won't make you more productive, or more impressive, or more optimized. It will make you more here. And that is everything. Because here is where your life is happening. Not in the next achievement, not in the next update, not in the next version of you you're trying so hard to become. Here, now, this breath, this body, this moment you've been rushing past for years. To practice simply being is to allow this moment to be enough. Not as a trick, not as a spiritual bypass, but as an act of trust. Trusting that the sky doesn't ask permission to open, that the ocean never justifies its stillness, that the tree doesn't check whether it's growing fast enough. Trusting that you too can exist without explanation, that you are not broken just because you are tired, that you are not behind just because you paused, that maybe, just maybe, this version of you, in this moment, is exactly who you are supposed to meet. And that meeting doesn't require effort. It requires allowing. Allowing yourself to breathe, to rest, to listen, to take up space without proving why you deserve it. That is the practice. And like any practice, you begin again every day. With each pause, with each breath, with each time you say, I don't need to do anything right now. I can just be. And in that being, you begin to feel what was there all along. The stillness that holds you, the silence that speaks, the life that doesn't need to be earned. Just lived, just felt, just allowed. You are not here to impress. You are not here to improve yourself endlessly. You are here to be alive. And being alive begins with being.